Welcome at our 13th Friction Bar. Friction Bars are a series of informal discussions organized by Kersnikova Institute since autumn 2016, where we meet with extraordinary individuals whose work leads them to research and create on the edges of art, science, and technology. The discussions usually happens in a club-like setting, but as we adapted to the COVID situation, we are organizing this discussion for the first time online. Tonight, Friction Bar, entitled Reproductive Narratives, is organized as a part of the Creatures Project, supported by the European Commission Horizon 2020 program, and is intended to shed some light on the research project by authors Maja Smrekar and Gjino Šutić. Besides Maja and Gjino, our guest is Margherita Pevere, who is also tackling the question of sexual and non-sexual reproduction issues and relates taboos. This online event is being recorded and could be used for the Creatures research as well for later online viewing. I would like to invite the audience to send questions via Facebook and YouTube, and those questions and comments will be discussed at the end of our conversation. So hello again, Maja, Gjino, and Margherita. While I'm staying here in the company of those two plants. Maja is right now in Ljubljana in her place, Gjino in Dubrovnik, and Margherita in Berlin. Let me introduce you for the beginning. Maja Smrekar's work has been established in the international art and science milieu. Grounded in sculpture and contemporary arts, she develops cross-conceptual productions that include performances, installations, site-specific art, drawings, videos, sound, workshops, lectures, talks, and texts. Her work has been internationally exhibited and presented, including at Kapelica Gallery and Museum of Contemporary Art, Metelkova in Ljubljana, at ZKM Karlsruhe, Musée de l'Homme Paris, Vienna Art Week, Het Nieuwe Institute in Netherlands, Hyundai Motor Studio Beijing, at the festivals Ars Electronica in Linz, Transmediale Berlin, and Rencontre Ben Dimanche in France. Among other awards, she received in 2017 the Golden Nika Award at Ars Electronica Festival, and 1 year later, the Slovenian National Prešeren Foundation Award. So now I'm going to Gjino Šutić. She is a multidisciplinary researcher and innovator developer in several fields of science and postmodern new media art. Even though he has an academic background in biotechnology, educational psychology, and medicinal chemistry, he uses and promotes DIY approach to biotechnology. In 2013, he founded non-profit Civilian Universal Research Institute for Applied Scientific Research and Development of Related Culture, where he does most of his work. As a guest lecturer, he has also been teaching in several universities and high schools. He's strongly involved in promoting STEAM, innovative art and innovative applied science, green policies, and investment in kids and youth, in local and national policies and developmental strategic plans. And Margherita Pevere, she's an internationally acknowledged artist and researcher whose practice glides across biological arts and performance with a distinctive visceral signature. Her transdisciplinary inquiry hybridizes biolab practice, biotechnology, ecology, environmental politics, gender, and death studies. Her body of work is a blooming garden crawling with genetically edited bacteria, her own cells, sex hormones, bovine blood, slugs, growing plants, and decomposing biological remains. Together with Marco Donnarumma and Andrea Familiari, she recently co-founded the artist group Fronte Vacuo to realize performances made of bodies, symbionts, sounds, machines, and images. She's completing a PhD at Aalto University in Finland on biological arts and feminist theory, and she's also a member of the Finnish BioArt Society and the Posthumanistics Hub. Recent accolades include the Digital Art Award of Roma Europa Festival and the honorable mention at the Share Prize. For the beginning, as a kind of introduction, I would briefly present the research that is the starting point of the project reproduction narratives. A group of Chinese scientists have some years ago, I think it was in 2016 for the first time, but more or less in the scientific community, published the first successful differentiation of endometrial mesenchymal stem cells into oocyte-like cells. Encouraged by their achievements, Maja Smrekar and Gjino Šutić decided to induce stem cells obtained from menstrual blood and differentiate them in vitro into germ cells. In reproductive narratives, the art project they are currently developing, they both view the process of in vitro transformation of one's menstrual blood stem cells into reproductive cells as a possibility that offers new potentials to women's emancipation. Because until now, reproductive cells have been available to women through the process of in vitro fertilization, which includes complex and potentially harmful interventions to the body, while this safer and more ethical form opens the path to new ways of reproduction, independent of one's biological characteristics or traditional family and societal structures. So let's begin with this Chinese research. Maja, this is the question for you. How did you come across with this Chinese research? Have you been searching for a topic as a sort of a bridge between your very high profile and internationally awarded K9 topology Artemis project and your further work? Or did you already know the direction in which you are going to move and you have been trying to find a scientific source for the development of your next work?
Thank you, Mojca, and thank you everybody for joining us in this dialogue this evening. Yeah, well, for a while now, I've been interested in assisted reproductive technologies and biomedicine. However, reproductive narratives are actually deriving from a line of thought that is actually stems in some of my also previous projects that started 6 and 5 years ago. There's been a line throughout the majority of my projects where I have been thinking about and re-establishing the processes in my body, and also establishing and finding and trying to give a name to my emotional and psychological places, and also I'm always interested to challenge the social expectations. So, for example, 5 years ago, I was interested very much into the totally strong and deep bond, loving bond that I share with my dog. But not just me towards him. Also, he shares it with me. So I was super fascinated with that, and it led me to the research of the into the research of the parallel evolution between humans and dogs. I consequently found out that there have been few genes in humans that have mutated as a consequence of living with wolves and later dogs. One of those, also the one that carries the inscription for the serotonin transporter. So consequently, I decided to extract serotonin molecules from the blood of me and my dog, then fuse them together into an odor, so that that was actually the smell of the essence of our relationship. Then it led me further, so that 4 years ago, I was thinking about the necessity of motherhood and then I decided for a performance, durational performance, where I was triggering my pituitary glands in order to send the message to the amygdala, where there's the center to evoke the prolactin hormone, which then sends messages to accelerate the production of milk in a body. That can be, by the way, done. This process could be achieved by a female or male or whichever actually body. So it has nothing to do with the reproductive organs or system. This process actually is working in a totally parallelly, actually, with the reproductive systems. So I managed to get colostrum. It was a very powerful process. Also, as a side effect, always oxytocin occurs. And that is, to me, that was feeling pure empathy. And I realized that just because I don't have, and I will not have biological children, that doesn't mean that I don't own really, really strong maternal instincts. But what I wanted to share with the public is that we all own very strong maternal instincts, and that maybe we should share those with each other. So I decided to share those feelings with the others, starting with the non-human other, with the dog. Then 3 years ago, I was consuming beta blockers, which were blocking the production when at the height of my cycle, when there should be progesterone and estrogen released. It was blocking them up until the point where I stopped consuming the beta blockers, and then progesterone and estrogen totally poured, accelerating again through my reproductive system in order to produce more reproductive cells. I then went to the IVF clinic for a collection, and the objective was to use those reproductive cells not as something what society would be expecting from me, but actually to use them as artistic medium. And what I decided was that I composed, I call it a molecular sculpture, where I denucleated it, and there were some kind of IVF procedures, also actually assisted reproductive technology, actually procedures, but they were actually used for art. And we denucleated the cell, inserted the somatic cell of my dog derived from saliva, and I actually, by that action, I wanted to put both species, human and a dog, into the same existential
level.
Yeah, same existential relationship. And what is going on at the moment, and what has been going on for the last year or so, is that my dear collaborator Gjino and I are both going through some different but still, on the other hand, very similar endocrinological processes, while I am going through the transition of menopause. Gjino has been recovering from the hypophysis operation. So we are both actually stepping into our new bodies, and I am always interested to actually think those processes through such long-term artistic research. Maybe I should, there are maybe some other things to say, but maybe later. I think that this is okay for now.
Yeah, well, you have mentioning hormones that you are taking, and also Gjino out of, no, you're not taking hormones, Gjino is taking, but also Margherita is taking hormones. So Maja, in one text titled Meditation, you sent it to me, you exposed a statement that the contemporary body serves as a prosthesis for biotechnologies that are used as surveillance for governing civil society, that our reproductive bodies are therefore means of productions. But humans as prosthetic gods, if I borrow Freud's words, have been since the beginning trying to somehow overcome and regulate natural laws by using the knowledge and different technologies. You yourself, you mentioned how you really trigger your body a couple of years ago to produce certain kind of hormones needed for realization of your project. Gjino, as I said before, you are taking hormones after your surgery. Margherita, you have been taking hormonal contraception. So what is your approach to this very wide area of hormone industry? At this point, I have to mention that there exists a kind of an alternative to hormone industry, at least concerning progesterone and estrogen, so-called bioidentical hormones, which have the identical chemical structures as humans' hormones, so they can't be patented by corporations. And maybe Gjino can explain a little bit more about it. So what is your approach toward hormones, which are not at all only sex hormones, but I mean, they can be also used in the case of thyroid or adrenal gland poor function, or for improving psychophysical well-being in the case of menopause, postmenopause, or so-called male andropause, or in the case of your situation, Gjino. So maybe for the beginning, Gjino, can you explain a little bit more about it, also out of your personal experience?
Of course. So the topic of hormones and this alternative reproduction narrative has been intriguing for me for a while now. My first inspiration as a kid when I decided to develop interest in biotechnology was all about reproductive cloning, of course. So watching Jurassic Park and this kind of movies was always like, wow. So that was the biggest inspiration, and still is the topic that drives me further. Especially with these new areas of not just reproductive cloning, but therapeutic cloning and stem cells. It's intriguing, totally. I had the pleasure to collaborate with Maja Smrekar on her project Artemis, dealing with hybrid stem cells, where we did lots of experimentation with hormones to manipulate single cells. I recently did also science art project Aqua Forensic with Robertina Šebjanić on effect of pharmaceuticals, consumed pharmaceuticals on microorganisms. Again, some of them were hormones, and we were exploring this like cellular effect. I had the pleasure to collaborate with Margherita also on her project WOMBs, where we did, among other stuff, collaborative endocrinological research. So all of these topics for me are interconnected and really intriguing. And personal touch was like relatively recent, which gave me totally new perspective beyond this reproductive and sexual hormonal aspect. As mentioned, I had like pituitary gland surgery, which is settled now, but I'm still recovering for months now. And it gave me totally new insight into how many of my thought processes and biological processes are controlled by the hormones pituitary gland release that I wasn't aware of. Like I was aware from textbook, but one thing is when you read something, and the other thing is when you experience something. For example, this like micro changes in hormonal level of the growth hormone, how strongly they affected my concentration and vitality, and this kind of stuff are totally amazing to explore in one end and scary on the other. So yeah, I decided to work on Maja on the reproductive narratives project, where we both share similar ideologies on how to approach things, but also different viewpoints. We both have a certain degree of subjectivity, which give us more objectivity in exploring this matter in total. Personally, I believe that we should have complete control over our own bodies. We should choose how much we want to control and how much we want to leave to automatic. And this border between mind over matter, matter over mind, like what am I psychologically and what am I biologically, where do these things meet, is something that I'm also trying to explore through theoretical research related with this project.
But hormones are extremely powerful substances, which are also in interrelationship with neurotransmitters and also immune systems. So having the control over our bodies, I mean, what does it exactly mean? I mean, because there are some people that they're buying via those platforms different kinds of hormones, but they can be very dangerous. For example, it's very well known and also proved that too much estrogen in the relationship with progesterone can induce the breast cancer or ovarian cancer. And of course, using the hormones is also a part of, let's say, anti-age therapy. I mean, there should be, I mean, you are the scientist, you know exactly how much and what to take, but it's quite a gray and also danger zone, which can't be saved without really specialists.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to add. Like in regard to the hormones, even though there is some normalization among, there is hormonal levels in general that we share as a species, as males and females to certain degree, but there is also extra high degree of subjectivity, how these hormones affect us. So small changes are different, and the same level of certain hormone doesn't affect all of us the same. So like when you expose yourself, when you tamper with hormones, you need to listen to your body and see how it affects you. Like from my experience as like hormonal treatments I was given during my recovery, I was given like the treatments of drugs and hormones which were calculated for average human of average weight, and they didn't, like, not just hormones but also pharmaceuticals didn't have, some of them affected me more than average person, some of them affected me less than average person. So it was like delicate balance, and I didn't want to give control over that to other people, even to the expert. Like I was constantly listening to my body and questioning them what I was given, when I was given, so I could see what's happening in my own body. And I think we all have a right to for information in general, like what are we given, and should the treatments be personalized or should they be standardized? I think in this regard, this whole area is opening doors for personalized medicine more than standardized medicine, because it's so delicate and interconnected that you need a personal approach, even though if it's like treatment or just like contraceptives or different hormones and drugs, we need certain degree of subjectivity and personalization and control, the freedom of choice.
Margherita, how you're tackling this topic in the WOM project? I would also connect with one of your statements in one of your interviews that not in all relationship you have been taking hormonal contraception, and depends on what did you decide to take it or not, and how taking contraception influenced not only your psychophysical well-being, but also the relationship you have been involved in.
I think that there is something that Maja, Gjino, and I share, which is a sort of malady of experimenting and interrogating our own bodies as material that is alive and has its own, we can call it agency of some kind. So the division between what is me and what is my body is already blurred, because it's a very complex entity that fits back into each other. And then it's also situated in a more, in a broader context that is a social and environmental context. So the project WOMS stems from observing my individual experience and linking it to the broader context and environmental context. So the project starts as the interrogation of the pill, which I take every day as a contraceptive, and it's a mix based on progestin, which was not always the case in my life, because in previous relationship I was sharing intimacy with a woman, so a person who was not producing sperm, so it was not needed. And since the sexuality comes also with a negotiation with fears and desires, also surrounding motherhood, it's quite clear for me that I won't become a mother, at least for the future that I can foresee. Then who knows what happens in a few years, I might change my mind, but this is my position for the moment being. And I started interrogating it. What does it mean to have a womb in different relationship, and how to navigate this complexity? And it all started, I remember, at a visit at my gynecologist, where I asked for a contraceptive. We discussed contraceptive options. And
I'm sorry, it was in Berlin, it was in Germany, or? It was in
Berlin. And this is quite important, actually, because we know that these kind of choices are not available for everyone, everywhere in the world. We see what is happening in these weeks in Poland. So there is a big variety, and the access to this possibility does speak of where you live, and it sits on decades and decades of battles for the self-determination of women. So it was a meaningful choice for me because of these complexities, but also I realized that basically the question of the gynecologist was, okay, let's discuss your lifestyle, in the sense, what kind of method would make you feel more comfortable? And this is how I then decided for this kind of pill. It must be said that I live very well with this pill, but the friend who suggested me for the first time this kind of pill that is only progestin based couldn't tolerate it. She really shrugged off after short, and this goes back to what Gjino said. Bodies are different and react differently. But my question was not only on my subjective experience, but how to frame this access to healthcare, hormonal contraception, and so on, from an environmental point of view. So this question led me to investigate what other animals are involved in biomedical research and experimentation and production of hormones. And this is how I then started learning a lot about slugs, because they inhabit terrestrial slugs. They inhabit a little bit of a gray area in the field. So there's a lot of research on endocrine disruption, both onto ecosystems, but also feeding back onto humans who inhabit this ecosystem. And we found some contradicting literature regarding slugs. Some previous research suggests that hermaphroditic terrestrial slugs react either to either the so-called female or male hormones. More recent research states maybe science is unresolved on this topic. And so and this is how this hermaphroditic animal became part of the artwork, because there is a gray area, and this is of course fertile for artistic research.
You're talking about Branco. Branco is the name, or was the name, of the slug. Why did you change the male name for a hermaphroditic slug? Why not Branca or Brancoti, Branche, plural form?
I always had names that do not necessarily conform to the gender that is assigned to the animals that populated my life. So it just was Branco. There is not a reason why Branco instead of Branca. These animals spoke to me as Branco. But of course, you know, naming someone is an act of love, affect, and power. So,
well, Maja, you're also very precise in choosing the names of your partners, your member of the family, and also collaborators. Talking about Byron and Ada, who were a part of this previous very interesting and successful project, Canine Topology Artemis. How
Yeah.
did you choose? Yeah.
How did I choose?
Yeah, names, yeah.
Well, first of all, my father's name was Branco, so maybe there is some kind of esoterical connection there. Yeah. So I love, Margherita, that you named the slug Branco. Well, yes. When I first saw Byron, I went, there was an ad about a litter of 6 weeks old blue merle Scottish border collies. And actually, I fell in love through that photo. I fell in love with Byron's sister. But then I came to visit this farmer who had this litter. And in the moment when I saw Byron, who was sitting there, so his two sisters were all the time playing, being very active, while he was sitting there in this corner and just watching, observing, like really serene, which then later came out as a total manipulation and lie, because he is all but serene. But okay, but when I saw his whole posture, it struck me so deeply that started immediately to associate this deep feeling with the feeling, the love which I had towards the first dog in my life, and that was Newfoundland dog. His name was not Byron, but because that Newfoundland dog has been long gone, then associatively I thought of a poem of Lord George Gordon Byron, the Epitaph to the Dog, or a poem at the grave of the Newfoundland dog. And this is how all this, the play of associations led to the name. And then, so Byron was the name. This is what I decided. But then, of course, the only possibility when Ada came along was that her name would be Lady Ada Lovelace from Eyachtal, which is the name of the breeding house where she came from. But yes, and then I also to me, it is super inspirational that their names are, and also narcissistic from my side, that their names are actually symbolizing the marriage between art and science, because, yeah, probably I don't need to explain. Mm-hmm. One was the poet, the other was one of the first programmers, but yeah, we all know.
In the relationship with Ada when she was a puppy, very little, you have been, as you already mentioned, you have been triggering pituitary gland to produce certain kind of hormones. I mean, it was amazing it sounds amazing for me when you first told me. Can you describe, because I assume it's a kind of a very old traditional technique, how to prepare, stimulate body to produce certain hormones for the lactation?
Yes, it was actually nothing special really regarding the tools that I used. I was every 4 hours for 20 minutes, I was pumping my breasts, and this is how I was triggering the pituitary glands. And those are actually working totally same as do you see me? Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay, because something changed. So those are working totally the same as the peristaltic pump. So the more you are pumping it, the more then the liquid will actually come out. But you also have to do that during the night. So in the cycle of 24 hours, every 4 hours for 20 minutes, the pumping needs to take place. So then after 4 to 5 weeks, the prolactin started to occur. And then I continued doing it. It was also advised to drink galactagogue teas, which are the ones that are helping the prolactin to accelerate the production of milk, and also B vitamin and iron. So that was it. Mm-hmm. From my side, and I found it on the WikiHow. Mm-hmm. The protocol. I mean, I did discuss it with a doctor friend who was my personal advisor, endocrinological advisor, but other than that, it was really a do-it-yourself performance. And this is actually a kind of approaches that I think are really super important. And also yesterday we were talking with Gjino how DIY science is important. And this is also why to connect this thought to my first answer when I was explaining the genesis of all of my projects that are connected with discovering the transitions and thinking with transitions in my body. Some of those are triggered by me. Some of those are, I mean, all of those are actually triggered by me. But so to me, it's very important to think those transitions with biotechnology and with science, because science is actually, no matter whether it is totally state-of-the-art high science or if it is a really old analog one, it is always political, and science is always actually, all the science that is not DIY is usually working in the service of political power and social control. So what I think is that when we disrupt these protocols of biotechnology, it is then when we can change that control a little bit or a lot. And it is then when we can actually take control over the narrative regarding our bodies and take control to decide whether our bodies are proper or not proper, whether they are ours or not, and whether they are good or not. And it is our power then, with these tools, to decide that ourselves.
Let's go to the reproductive narratives. Well, it's very challenging project on the semantical and also practical level, because throughout most of the world, the menstruation is regarded as dirty and polluted. In the traditional cultures, menstruating body had and also have the status of numinous, which is why women were not, and still somewhere they are not allowed to prepare food, for example, or they had to isolate themselves in so-called those days. Also in our Western culture, nowadays the pads and tampons are advertised subtly by avoiding the red color, using instead of it, let's say, blue, and promising the consumer safety and relaxation, which in other words means that the surroundings will not notice that they're menstruating. In case of non-fertilization, the body gets rid of menstrual blood as useless material, but you, Maja and Gjino, on the contrary, by using menstrual blood as a source of germ cells and consequently fertilization, you are practically and semantically reversing the meaning of menstrual blood. So could you explain both levels, practical and the other one, semantical, and also what are the properties of the menstrual blood? Maybe Gjino, you can start for.
So it's important to mention at the beginning that we are just beginning our research. So we are still opening doors and exploring different possibilities. We are researching the topic of menstruation and production of stem cells, extraction and isolation of stem cells from menstruation and transferring them in oocytes practically, but also all related philosophical and theoretical aspects. Like, for example, for me, it's intriguing to explore also anthropology of menstruation, how in different civilizations we see it differently. Also today, what you mentioned, Mojca, that all the advertises in Western societies are like how to hide the symptoms of menstruation, while one of the first theories of human evolutions and biocommunication considers menstruation as important visual communication tool, which would mark that the women will be fertile after it. So it was a positive sign that would mark the fertility of a woman later. And there is lots of theoretical research being done on solidarity of women, like why do the groups of women synchronize their periods biologically and this kind of aspect. So it's like really wide field and cool to explore. Practically, our starting point is the science paper published by Chinese researchers in 2016, which gives the protocols how to extract and isolate stem cells and transfer them into oocytes from period blood. When we found out about this article, it was really intriguing because it put menstruation period blood in totally different narrative. It showed it as a valuable biological resource, not something that you throw away, but something that is amazing just to compare, like market price of one stem cell, if you are doing a paid IVF, is around 10,000 euros. And from one period blood, one dose of period blood collected during 1 day of menstruation, you can produce 100 of those. So it's like disrupting the market totally, disrupting the technologies. But yeah, still, this protocol is really complicated. It was designed to prove the concept. So with lots of tests, lots of expensive reagents that you can't easily afford if you are doing DIY or with limited budget. So Maja and I are remixing the protocols at the moment, optimizing them for the production for our own experimentally purposes and trying to make it more affordable. So yeah, that is the starting point. That is what we are doing at the moment in the creatures framework. But also we are exploring this related theoretical and philosophical and anthropological aspects and connotation that this technology brings, not just in the regard to women, but also in regard to bodies in general, in cells in general, into ownership of cells and freedom of reproduction. Classical and alternative,
yeah. Maja, can you say a bit more about this semantic level, because of this reversion of the meaning of menstruation?
Yes, well, for me, this specific action of in the midst of well, first of all, in the midst of the menopausal transition to be producing reproductive cells out of gatherings of some of my last periods in my life is somehow I think undecent, inappropriate, and unnatural. And these are all the classifications that I like very much, and I find them very amusing and inspirational. But okay, to be more serious, how I see this very action of transitioning the reproductive, I mean, my menstruation into reproductive cells is that this very action is disrupting the power relationship between the subject and the object of representation. And the subject here in this specific case is the IVF doctor and IVF biotechnologist, and the object of the representation is body, whichever body that is put on display and treated as if in a car shop, where while subjectivity, feelings, privacy are not addressed or important at all. So even though I know that as it is to my knowledge, I think that, I mean, there hasn't been any informations that these Chinese scientists or any other scientists that they would, I mean, at least officially not, that they would succeed these specific reproductive cells to go viably, therefore successfully through the process of IVF. But should they do that, then this is a total paradigmatic shift for the whole assisted reproductive technology field. And from that perspective, I see the specific reproductive cell, which is not collected from the ovaries, fallopian tube, womb out, but actually transformed from the menstruation. I see it as a total ontological catalyst, which is actually totally evoking some total agency, which is totally original. It could not happen any other way. Yeah, this is what I wanted to say, but what I wanted to say also is this. So now we actually have the power to do this, but then which is all good, but on the other hand, also the institutions have the power to do it, and sooner or later they are going to succeed into the full IVF procedure of also this kind of reproductive cells. And the question that interests me is, do we have the power, I mean, whether we even have the power to decide whether menstruation as this almost one of the last uncolonized products of our body will be turned into capital.
What do you think, Margherita? Do we have a power to avoid to turn that into capital? I mean, because in according to your projects, you're describing or define the body as unsealed, unstable, and leaky body. What do you mean exactly? Can you explain this notion of the body?
Sure. Well, this is a term, leaky, that I borrow from the feminist critique, namely from philosopher Margrethe Schildrich, but she actually called her book on IVF technology and how to frame this beyond the normative classical family in Western thought, and so as a possible way to reappropriate reproductive bodies from a feminist perspective. She talks about leaky bodies, but that does not remain within the frame of the female body. This would be a misunderstanding, because if we understand our bodies as an entity that is in continuous exchange with the environment, with what we eat, the surgeries we have, it becomes clear that it's not the fact that certain bodies menstruate that make it leaky. Rather, it is the body that is leaky because it's a material and also natural cultural entity. And so this leakiness refers to the fact that there is always something that cannot be contained, and that does not have to do with gender. It must be stated clearly. We have just half an hour ago, we heard about Gjino's experience with the hormone sustaining his healing process after surgery. And this is clearly not about a body that is menstruating. Something else is going there, but this, again, this transgresses, there is something that exceeds, that pushes beyond borders. And this also brings us to think about the way we understand individuality as something that is contained within one's individual experience. But this is also a misleading narrative. We live in a polluted environment, we live in cities, we eat polluted food, and at the same time, we pollute the environment and the food we eat. And as of today, what we understand the body is also defined by the biotechnological intervention and knowledge that we gain through scientific experimentation. So it's not a well-defined entity that we can just lay on the table and say, this is it. Just a few weeks ago, very, very recently, I learned about a new gland, a new salivary gland that seems to be discovered, and it's quite hidden inside the anatomy of the skull. So it was not, since it's a soft body, it was not easy to spot. It's tiny and hidden, so it was not easy to spot with the biomedical devices available so far. And it's a salivary gland. So it's not something that no one looked for before, but it was just not possible to see it. So also how we understand what we are depends on this imbrication and junctions and overlappings of technology and culture and society. And I found interesting while listening to Maja when she trying to unpack a bit this semantic shift of menstrual blood. What I find utterly inspiring is that either it's a tabooish matter or it's seen as a discard. You know, you change your tampon, you throw it in the bin, or maybe your dog eats it if you live in a messy environment. That happens for dog people. But you are trying to shift from waste to a generative entity. And this is what I find most powerful. And this is also where we can, and when I say we, I speak of artists, DIY scientists, or researchers trying to challenge the normative understanding of society and science and philosophy. This is where we can reclaim a stance. This is where we can revert the meaning of a material, like in this case menstrual blood. If that then becomes exploited by the capitalist society, it's something that probably we should be aware of. I mean, this is what capitalism does. It takes something that was waste and then makes a big resource out of it. This is what capitalism does. But nevertheless, it's important to do it and state a stance and state this is another opening for reclaiming something that debunks power.
Gjino, I mean, especially that they're dealt with stem cells, obeying a lot. I mean, stem cells technology really obey a lot concerning different kind of fields. But the problem is that they're very rarely sown in the body. That's why they're called golden seeds. And as well, there is another problem. As they contain the possibility of life, they can turn into cancer cells. So according to this project, reproductive narratives, is it important that you take the stem cells from menstrual blood for their successful differentiation, or could they be also taken from any other tissue? Would it be more dangerous or less successful if they had been taken from other tissue, from bone tissue, for example?
Of course. So yeah, when we discussed about the stem cells, it's like really wide topic. So, but in general, just to simplify, there is like three general kinds of stem cells that researchers are experimenting with. One is embryonic stem cells, which are omnipotent. They can become any possible bodily tissue, but also a new person. There is pluripotent stem cells, such as these, which can't become a new person, but can become like several types of tissues. So they're amazing for therapeutic purposes if we don't reprogram them. Maja and I are working on reprogramming these pluripotent stem cells into oocyte, which has the potential to become a being also for reproduction. And there is also a third kind of stem cells, totally artificially created stem cells, where you take already differentiated cells, such as skin cells, and then transfer them, modify them to become a stem cell. So they can become other types of tissues. So these artificially induced stem cells are actually problematic because in this process, mostly you damage their genes. So they are great for in vitro experimentation. They can become different types of tissues, but they are not so much good for therapeutic purposes because if you put them in a body, you don't know if they are like, they will become healthy tissue or they can become cancerous cells. So that's why for therapeutic purposes, embryonic stem cells are still the best. But we are confined with ethics and all related discussions in how to use embryonic stem cells. Should we use them? Shouldn't we use them? So it's totally different in different countries with different views, social views on what these cells are and what they are not. And this, like, for example, these stem cells we are experimenting with, they are not rare in human body, but they are not easily obtainable. So these pluripotent stem cells, traditionally, if you want them taken out to experiment, you could take them out from bone marrow, which is really painful process, and it's not something that you want to do on yourself. And there is also extraction from, for example, fat tissue, but certain types of fat tissue, which is still delicate to extract, but also more delicate and difficult to separate. And with period, we are experimenting something that is flushed outside of the body. So it's not invasive methodology of collecting these cells. And separation, isolation of the cells itself is rather simple. You just need a centrifuge that you can do DIY and certain reagents that we are also working on DIY alternatives. So it's like cheap and simple method, which is opening lots of new doors into safe experimentation and affordable experimentation with stem cells.
So Maja and Gjino, you already mentioned that reproductive narratives, the project is not only about the research of more humanistic and gentle alternative to psychophysically exhausting and also humiliating in vitro reproductive practices, but you're also opening up a critical discourse of reproductive and post-reproductive body. Anyway, could you explain what do you expect out of this project? And although the project is in the very beginning state, do you already know what are you going to do with the biological result?
Maja, should you or should I?
I mean, that's a question for both of you. I mean, I'm not sure.
I can answer in regard to the output of the, yeah, we want to keep the research open. So at the very end, we just want to be able to affordably produce Excel from the period blood as a proof of concept that it can be done in affordable, safe way using DIY technologies, and also keep the narrative open for all possible options and doors which it opens. Yeah.
What kind of possible doors? And I mean,
well, you know, as I already mentioned earlier, there is a market niche here. I'm kidding. Because, you know, I was thinking, what if we patent, what if we succeed to put through the whole IVF procedure, you know, and then patent it ourselves? Or patent it under the, you know, Creative Commons. Well, But we would need quite a lot of money for those procedures and investors. Yeah, well, it's like this. I think that the very process here, along with all that I've mentioned, how I see this very process is already quite a strong carries quite a strong political stand. Apart from the objective, which is absolutely straightforward, to get reproductive cells from menstrual blood and use them as artistic medium. Besides that, I don't know where this whole research is going to lead us. There are many possibilities. However, I hope that it can allow us to contribute to the discourse about reinterpreting the different processes and transitions that are going on in the female bodies of all genders, because it's not just because gender and feeling female is not as the same as with the lactation, is not actually always connected with the reproductive organs. So it's also the whole process, I think, is opening absolutely the discursive plateau for many ecofeministic and queer theories. So we hope that with this whole process and project that we add our little contribution into those contents.
Mm-hmm. But how could you manage to collaborate and develop this project now in this situation according to the constraints during the pandemic? Since you, Maja, you're staying in Ljubljana, Gjino in Dubrovnik, your menstruation blood you have been collecting for 1 year with Gjino in Dubrovnik, as I understand.
Well,
post offices are being busy these days.
Yes, and also body has a very diverse potentials of transport. No, I'm kidding. Well, we are still thinking about our options, but there are several options. We could either be continuing the project in Zagreb or Ljubljana or Dubrovnik. At this stage, we managed to execute this project separately, but from the beginning of January, we are going to need to be executing it together. So it's going to be like this, that either a part of the whole material is going to be brought to Slovenia, or the other part of the material is going to be brought to Croatia. All of these reagents can either be held on the room temperature or -20. We have the equipment for such transports. And anyway, obviously, now with all these different but same vaccinations, this is going to be the modus operandi in the next few months for everybody, to carry different kind of pharmacological and biomedical and biotechnological reagents through crossing borders on -20 to -80 degrees Celsius, special transportation boxes. So again, also here we are going to contribute our little part.
Margherita, how are the pandemic measures and restrictions influencing your work condition? As I presented you at the beginning, you are completing a PhD at Aalto University in Finland. On the other side, you are co-founder of the group Fronte Vacua. You are collaborating with Marco Donnarumma and Andrea Fabigliari. And so how you manage to continue your work, or you're more or less focusing on writing your PhD?
I think it's time to forget about being productive, in the sense that the pandemic, or better, the consequences of the pandemic impaired my work quite drastically at many levels. I was not able to go to Helsinki because of a series of converging dynamics, but I was not able to go to Helsinki, so I was not able to work in the lab there, in biophilia laboratory, which otherwise I usually work at. I was not able to find a partner here in Germany to continue my research, a partner lab, because of the pandemics, institutional laboratory are, and this is understandable, more cautious and more wary to open the doors to staff they don't already know and with whom they don't have already worked. It's totally understandable. And so I try to work on my dissertation, and it's progressing, but at the same time, it's also very hard to focus, I must say. I mean, the mental capacity is constantly bombarded by not only news, but that I'm working completely independently. I don't have a producer for my individual research. And there are almost every day, or at least every week, some potentially destabilizing news. So the moment you are focused on doing something, then you know something happens that requires urgent attention to find solutions. So how are you supposed to be focused and productive? Nevertheless, you have the obstination of the artist and the researcher who continues working anyway. I'm in isolation because I actually met one person in 3 weeks now.
Oh.
Yeah, but because, you know, one friend is busy, the other one is sick, then you have a cold, you don't want to meet with the others because you never know. And so, yes, I'm here with my plants, basically. And at the same time, of course, I'm in contact with my supervising professor and my advisors, but it's not the kind of exchange you otherwise have. So it always delayed in time. You need to take meetings, and then something happens to them, and so you delay, blah, blah, blah. And at the same time, I am working on a new production with Fronte Vacua. And this is a more theatrical production. And this should take place actually in January, if situation doesn't go worse. But also on that front, there are a lot of challenges that pose every day more work to do the same exactly stuff that you otherwise played. But this is exhausting on the one hand, but on the other, I think it's important to say how the experience of working with biological material and through post-human theory gave me the tools to reframe this crisis. Of course, I mean, we know this is an ecological crisis. We know that this pandemic is a consequence of exploitation, and this is a consequence of making ecosystems more vulnerable. Of course, it's dramatic for many of us, and we hope the vaccine will come soon. It's much needed. But this kind of vulnerability is perfectly inscribed in the biopolitical, necropolitical dynamics that happens between being alive in this time. So I think it's important that the voice of practitioners from the biological arts is heard to the broader audience, because this is something people like us saw coming. We already knew it. People were already doing research on this kind of pandemics, and then no government was really ready to manage the situation. So again, working within this frame, you know, you asked earlier what is possibly the output or the contribution of a project like the one that Gjino and Maja are researching. It's not a product, it's not the artifact, but it's knowledge that they are producing.
Process of knowledge, yeah, producing knowledge, yeah. So can we say, is it possible to say that the fact that you are working in this field of biotechnology and art crossing, that it is a kind of advantage for you coping or more understanding what is going on, as you already said? Because I read in one of your interviews that at the beginning of pandemics this year, you warned your relatives in Italy how to behave in those conditions. And I'm interested, did they follow your advice? Do they trust you as much to, let's say, obey you? Because it was very crucial at the time where it was not really known what is going on and how serious this pandemic can be.
Yeah, you know, I live in Berlin. My PhD is in Finland, and my family and all friends in Italy. So I keep an eye on the news of the 3 different regions. Not every day, but like I see what happens. So I remember talking also with Gjino about this in February and say, but hey, it's coming here. And then the numbers were rising in Italy. Here in Germany, no one was really still bothered. And then when the first casualties happened, the people started dying. It was kind of in the region of where my parents live, and they are over 70s. So the first thing I did with regard to the pandemic was to call them and say, hey, you need to cut your social life now. We know that people, when they are retired, have or sometimes have a very lively social life. So it was a bit shocking for them, saying, well, why? And I explained, well, we need to understand how these things work before we understand how we can behave. And then I also realized that the knowledge that people like us gained, for example, the protocols of how to wash hands for sanitation, for making them sterile. This is a technique. Most of people didn't know it because it was not required. We all relied on vaccines. Or why using a mask? I started using mask pretty early, and then people was watching at me like if I were just a poser, and then it turns out it does help. It's not 100% certainty, but it does help. And so these gestures of intimacy, contamination, protection have become important. And then it reached the headlines. So I think that it became more general knowledge, but I think most people don't really know the difference, for example, between a virus and bacteria. And this is not because they are ignorant, but because we're still living in this split of the 2 cultures. There is not enough scientific literacy. There is not enough understanding of biological processes. So there was a starting point again. I don't know how much they listen to me. They say they did, but you know, in family tend to be rebels, maybe.
But they're okay. I mean, they were.
Yes.
They are now still
Yeah.
they're okay. Yes. Maybe as last question, I would like to ask you, why are female artists and since 90s also other gender artists so much more occupied by the topics of the bodies, their bodies, comparing with male artists? Which, in my opinion, is not only true in the performing and multimedia arts, but as well in dance, theater, visual arts, literature. Because if I focus only in performing arts, at the beginning of performing arts 70 or 60 years ago, therefore decades before queer theories, there have been quite a lot of so-called white male artists radically focused in body topics. For example, Vienna Actionists or Vito Acconci, as if they were at that time themselves embodying the wants and the diseases of the collectives and societies of second post-war World War.
Well,
I will be the shortest because I don't have background in
Yes.
performative art and I'm not acquainted so much with the field. Maya and Margherita both have more knowledge in this regard and better know the scene, so they can comment further. But my personal opinion on this matter, I noticed that the female prevalence and also queer artist prevalence. My personal opinion is that society doesn't push, today's society doesn't push so much white heterosexual male as a social group to re-question themselves and their behavior and thus their own bodies as much as it questions females and queers. So that's why I think these artists are more pushed into thinking about their bodies, and using it as a performance is just like one of the byproducts of this social pushing these social groups into thinking more and having to justify their bodies more.
Margherita, maybe?
Yeah. Yes, I also find interesting how there is abundance of female artists working across performance and biological art. Although we should also mention that there are practitioners, male practitioners, such as Guy Benari, who was at Kersnikova a couple of years ago, Martin House, who recently started a tiny mining project, which involves the extractions of rare earth and metals from your body. It's a distributed open source project. Marco Donnarumma is working across, but his approach comes from the sound and performance, but he also questions normativity of the male white body quite straightforwardly. And this is just to mention a few. Then there is Martin O'Brien in the UK working on the sick body. I think we should reframe maybe or expand what is inside your question. That is very powerful, because if we talk about reproductive narratives and sexuality, I think we would need more voice of male artists. If we frame the body as a political entity, in, for example, with the reference to the work by Martin House, he talks about sites of execution, algorithmic, and the transformation of metals. Come on, this is me losing words too early. Alchemy. And this is also political because it then becomes a question of power, of knowledge production. But what maybe is the underlying red thread, which I pretty much see along what Gjino said, is the questioning of power relations. And if we take that, we agree that there is a figure that is still in power, who is the white, able man, then of course, who is not, who doesn't comply to this paradigm, has a lot to say about this. But I want to hear what Maja says, and I think this is also something for art historians.
Maja, maybe?
Yes, well, I absolutely agree with both. And there's also Stellark, for example. I mean, he's not from our generation, but still, I really find him absolutely inspiring in all his sensitivity, addressing such subjects, and also already 20 years ago to realize and making conscious the very, very famous thought that the body is obsolete. Now the body, our body is an absolute, as I said, and it's also borrowed from the queer theories, that it's the prosthesis of the all kind of technological market-driven products. But and our body and our subjectivity is absolutely totally intertwined with any kind of technology, not just vet technology, definitely. But yeah, I think that still, no matter how many men we count, there is absolutely, I mean, it's absolute fact that there is much more, many more women that are actually using their body as an artistic medium in order to bring out the discourse about the civil rights. So in my opinion, this is a symptom of the time, because only, I mean, mainly just those that have the problem with these discourses, which are being gaslighted, actually, are feeling the need to address those problems. And obviously white heterosexual men are not having that need so much. I think it is connected with the repatriarchalization of our society, which is on one hand, I mean, it's been actually a long coming from a long history of such mind frames. On the other hand, it is reviving again. Of course, we all see it through populism. So the other thing is that what our society is prone to enable is narcissistic behavior, and it's usually being much more enabled by society, by all of us, when this narcissistic behavior is owned by male than if it's owned by female, although there's also quite some females, of course, that are very prone to such behavior. So I think it's an absolute symptom of the time, and I think it's very, very important to talk about that. Why female and queer people are working with their bodies, are addressing their bodies in order to address the civil rights so much. and not so much why there is such a lack of white heterosexual men in such art practice. Also, we should maybe not just practice, but talk about this particular phenomenon much more. And I totally agree with Margherita, and I absolutely hope that theoreticians and art historians are not going to gaslight also this phenomenon. It's very important, and it's very, very present.
Well, for the end, we got 2 questions from the audience. The first question is for Maja and Gjino. And the question is, do you have any idea how the project is going to be artistically manifested?
Yeah, I can start maybe. So as I mentioned before, our research is at the very beginning. We are still opening doors. So we divided the research in 2 phases. First phase is for exploring in all possible directions. And the second phase is on focusing and picking something that intrigues us the most, that will be the base of the artistical representation. So we are tempering and thinking about several ideas, but I wouldn't like to mention them now because probably they will change. But what we both agreed upon that we will produce artistically is like science and art workshop, which will be participatory for engaging for citizens. Where they can be engaged in the science and art aspects of the project by themselves. So that's for now. Maja?
Yeah, I think it's important to divide, but also it's important that artists have such wonderful opportunities as Gjino and I have now. Some artistic processes are have a totally specific objective at the end, and that is an art product. While some other processes are actually so-called practice-based artistic researches, which are also extremely important in building the discourse about a specific theme and content. And there is definitely sooner or later going to happen some kind of product, or I'm actually having a feeling, because it's such a vast field, probably a plethora of products. But I really am happy that I can claim in this project that it is an artist-based artistic research, and therefore it is meant to evoke hopefully important discourses. However, yes, at the end of, I think that at the either middle or at the end of February next year, I hope that all the conditions regarding the pandemic will allow, but definitely we are going to execute a workshop. So that definitely is coming. Yeah, at this stage.
There is another question for all of you. Do you feel that this project expands your sense of freedom? I think it refers on both of your projects. I mean, the work that you are occupied by. Is this one of the motivation behind doing it? So is the freedom also the one of the motivation behind doing your work?
I can start again. Yeah, I would say yes, but that's not the only motive. That is one of the motives. It's not why we decided to do this project to begin with, but like while researching and discussing, not just for myself, but for example, I have a dear friend of mine, a female friend, who lost her ovaries due to the medical issues, but still she has uterus. And like finding out about this kind of research takes away psychological and biological pressure on her to that she will be unfertile for the rest of her life, because now we have the technology to produce unlimited egg cells from her uterine tissue. It doesn't need to be period, it can be directly from the uterine tissue, which is like totally, in my opinion, freedoming to my female friends. Also, the age limit of reproduction, it pushes it further. So even after females stop having periods, still we can take sample of uterine tissue to produce this kind of egg cells. But for myself also, because I've always been flirting with the idea of reproductive cloning, even though it's not a popular topic, and I don't know why it's so much of a taboo. But yeah, it opens door in this kind of reproductions also, but also maybe because males have some analogous tissues in their own bodies, it also opens doors to produce oocytes from male tissues, which is opening new doors in freedom sense. So yeah, it supports post-genderism theory of reproduction, and it's new technologies that we just need to accustom ourselves to, because we are already living with them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's freeing for me.
Maja?
Yes, well, I like to think of all the projects that are, which, no matter the product at the end, that they are process-based, and especially if they are, the process of these projects is mainly executed in the biotechnological laboratory. I like to think of such projects, and also this one, as some kind of discovering some micro-performative strategies through all these protocols, which would maybe through which we would maybe invent some, also with this discourse itself, some new or alternative molecular sensibilities, which would actually challenge our techno-political living, which is very fascistic at the moment. So yes, I do see a lot of potential for freedom in this process.
Mm-hmm. There's also the first question for all of you. We have been addressing a variety of biomaterials being utilized in science and art in the contemporary world, including menstrual blood, stem cells, hormones, etc. Can you speculate on any materials that have not been colonized thus far, but will come in the forefront in the future?
Menstruation.
Like I would say atoms and subatomic particles, even though atoms have been colonized for art. For example, IBM used electron microscopes to move atoms around to do like micro drawing with them. But I don't know about artists, not corporation, doing so, like using atoms for art. And as far as I know, subatomic particles are the new field which will hopefully be open.
Gjino, Margherita, I wish you a lot of patience during this edgy pandemic period, and nevertheless, a lot of creativity as well. So I hope we're going to see quite soon. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, and bye.